This episode of Just the Tip-Sters is sponsored by Clean Spa Bath and Body. That's clean with a K. Cleanspa.com. Clean Spa. Prepare to smell delicious.
From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's Just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
We're going to need a bigger boat.
This episode with special guest Chief Ty O'Mara of the Ashland, Oregon Police Department to talk about the unsolved murder of David Michael Grubbs. Remember, if you've got a tip for Melissa, please tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. You just might hear your tip on the podcast. And now here's your host, tracking down leads with a white-hot fervor unmatched anywhere, unless she discovers there's a sale at the UGG outlet, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. Yeah, you should just, get out of my way if there's a sale at the UGG outlet, because it's not going to be pretty, and I will run over you and your children.
Yes, and your small pet if
and
you
your
have
pet.
one. Yeah.
I probably would try to avoid the pet, but you and your kids that's going to happen. Just get out of my way.
So if there's an UGG outlet anywhere near you, you should find out if Melissa is also in the neighborhood, because you just probably want to avoid it.
I am tunnel visioned. So you would just for your own safety, get out of the way. It's not a threat. It's nothing like that. It's just for your own safety. Just stay out of my way.
It's a public safety announcement.
It is a beautiful PSA, which, we need to discuss that in a minute. Another PSA, which was fantastic, sent to us.
But, oh, really?
Yeah. But before we get into that, I need to remind you, because the producer is very angry and vengeful, and if I don't say things, he gets mad and hits me really hard. So
Darling,
yes,
there's law enforcement listening to this.
I'm just kidding. He doesn't ever touch me. I don't allow him to ever in any way.
Well, now you see, you want to go I'm
in a bubble. No, I'm in a bubble. I live in a bubble, and he just rolls me around from room to room. But he can't touch me because I'm in a bubble.
Shut up now.
Okay, yes. So if you have a tip for the show, a story you'd like us to cover, please feel free to call us at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837. You can email us at jttipsters@gmail.com. And we have a Patreon page that is an endless source of joy for me, because people are so kind and fun. And our newest patron is Bridget, who subscribed at her own level because it's a lucky number, and that is the sweetest thing in the world. She's wishing us luck, and we understand it isn't always feasible in your budget to contribute to a Patreon account, but you can do something that's just as wonderful and in some ways priceless, which is you could go to iTunes if you use that service and review us, give us a 5-star rating, and subscribe to the podcast. And that's a really big gift to us. So,
it really is. And we do appreciate it. And I guess we're going to have to start calling it Apple Podcasts now, because iTunes is soon to go away. But
thank you for the reminder.
Yeah.
I'm going to sound even older than I am if I keep calling it iTunes. It'll be like I have to say it without my teeth. So it's Apple Podcasts. Yes, it's going to be Apple Podcasts, Apple TV, and what's the other? Apple Music, I guess. So I'm kind of glad that they're separating things out. We'll see how it shakes out. But since I
use iTunes here in the studio, I hope that some parts of it remain.
I know they will. So as far as the PSA, I do have to say this. We, speaking of those emails that mean the world to us, we got a lovely email from Tipster Sue in Queensland, Australia. And I have to say that Australia is just, I'm not sure what's happening, but the listeners are growing in Australia like leaps and bounds. And it's just so fascinating. It's the US is always number one English speaking country. And then Australia was number 4 behind the UK and Canada. And Australia is like, where are you? I don't know if they're having more babies that love true crime podcasts or what's happening, but the listenership is growing by leaps and bounds. And the listeners in Australia are so interesting and fascinating and creative and wonderful. So by the emails that we get. So Tipster Sue sent a lovely email to us that she had just discovered us and she was enjoying listening to the backlog of episodes we have. But she included a PSA that runs in Australia. It's on YouTube, and it's 30 seconds long, and it's really well done. It's animated, sort of black and white. And she said she was encouraged by the episode of Sandra Kirby and talking about how college students became more aware of how to walk to their cars, especially female college students, to be at night after class, to be more safety conscious. And this PSA is wonderful, and it's about being a woman walking to your car at night or being out at night. And it shows the thing that my mom taught me as a young person to put, this is back in the old days when people had keys instead of a key fob for your car, but you put your keys between your fingers so you have kind of a weapon that you can, scratch someone with. It's kind of the most rudimentary way to protect yourself as a woman, but hey, it fucking works. If somebody's coming at you and you jab them in the eye with your key to your, back door, it's going to hurt. It's going to make a mark for sure. My mom, God bless her, kept giving me these really ugly ass keychains with little leather covered spray bottles of mace. And
that's kind of adorable.
Kind of adorable. It was after I moved out and I'm on my own and I'm in my early 20s and and I'm, working my butt off many hours, days, nights, come home late, whatever. So they're like a little leather covered spray bottle. And it has it's typically turned off and you need to then push it to the side to turn it on. By the time I figured the motherfucker out, the guy would have already impregnated me and left. So I kept giving them back to her. I would wrap them up and put them in her stocking at Christmas because it was
No, you did
I
not.
did. I kept giving them back to her because I knew me. I left them in my car all the time. I knew what would happen. I would forget and think it's breath spray and fucking mace myself. It's not. It's a dangerous thing for me. It wasn't going to be helpful. I'm a big girl and I apparently look scary and I, can take care of myself and nobody was going to come at me. And if they did, hopefully I can get out of it. But I just didn't want, potential mace spray in my own fucking face. And I knew what happened.
I know I'd do it.
Right,
Certainly
that's me.
I would. Yeah.
My mom was, elegant and, fragile and delicate and she wouldn't do that. But I would be like, hey, what's going on? Ow, my eyes. I mean, it would be a terrible thing.
Yeah,
so
okay.
It was like a fruit cake that you just kept passing back and forth.
Oh my God.
Every
That's
holiday.
hilarious.
Yeah. My mom and I had some really fun little traditions like that, but I would rewrap up her mace spray and put it in her stocking. But so this lovely email from Sue was really interesting. I'm going to see if I can get it and maybe we'll post it on the Just the Tipsters Facebook page or even on the Patreon page if we can. It's really interesting and a little bit heartbreaking, but Sue made the point that it's good that these things get out in the world so you can see them and ways to protect yourself, especially as a woman, but anyone in a world that can be kind of dangerous. So this episode is sponsored by Clean Spa. Clean Spa carries a full line of original bath and body products that feature dozens of unique fragrances. I got a shipment from Clean Spa this week and I'm so happy with it. I got the Sweet Smoke Scrub. The scrub in the shower is wonderful. I have sensitive skin and this scrub is soft and doesn't hurt and make me feel like I've been assaulted and yet I still smell delicious. I got the vanilla sandalwood bath syrup. Can't wait to use that. I couldn't wait to break open the essential oil treatment. I got the very vanilla scent, and I've already used that numerous times. It comes with a pump, which was really helpful. And I even ordered something for producer Mark, which is the Humanity Shea Moisturizing Lotion for Men. I got him the Bound and Shagged scent, which is a blend of amber musk and black pepper, and it's a shea moisturizing lotion.
And I have to say, we tried it.
Yeah.
And it smells really good.
I forced it onto Mark's hands.
I don't wear that kind of stuff.
No, he does not.
And it smells good.
It does smell delicious. So remember, that's clean with a K, cleanspa.com. And you get 15% off your total order by entering Tip-Sters in the promo code at the checkout. That's Tip-Sters for 15% off of your total order. Cleanspa.com. Clean Spa. Prepare to smell delicious. We feel really fortunate to have had a wonderful guest on this week's episode. That's Chief Ty O'Mara, who's the Chief of Police of Ashland, Oregon. And this case is very important to him. You can really hear it and feel it in his voice and what he says. And the case was brought to us by a tipster who didn't really want to be a tipster, but wanted this case to be covered. And I understood once I started looking into it. It's almost 8 years old now. It happened in 2011 in Ashland, Oregon, which has a very low crime rate. And it was such a odd, bizarre happening that it has affected the community. And they really would love to get this solved. And I don't blame them. First of all, Chief O'Mara, right underneath the parents of David Michael Grubbs, parents and sister, friends who loved him. But Chief O'Mara is personally invested. You can hear it. He was a patrol officer at the time, and he was on duty when what happened to David happened. And it has affected him, and he is now the chief of police, and it is a mission for him to get this case solved. So we're really blessed today to have the chief of the Ashland, Oregon Police Department, Chief Ty O'Mara. Thanks for being here, Chief.
Thanks for having me, Melissa. Nice to be on the air with you, so to speak.
Well, I was saying to you earlier that not all law enforcement is as transparent and open as you are, or is willing to talk about a case, but it is very clear that this case is extremely important to you. So we'll just do a little history of the case for the tipsters, and then we can get into a discussion about it. So this case was brought to me by an Ashland, Oregon resident, and she does not listen to podcasts because she can't stand, especially true crime podcasts, because she can't stand the thought of someone not living. And she's a very sweet woman, and she said this case has bothered her. I think she's lived in Ashland for about between 15 and 20 years. And she said it's her favorite place to have lived with her family. Her husband had a job where they had to move a lot, but they settled in Ashland, and she loves it with all of her heart. They've raised their children there because they love the area so much. So this case has bothered her, and it's one that was almost hard for her to discuss. So the more she starts talking, I was like, oh, it's a really interesting case. And in my world, when someone has their life taken for a reason that's completely unknown, it's an even more interesting topic, because what you want is to find who did this and why, not even maybe find out ever why, but who did it, and they need to, answer for what they have done. So let's just a short history of David Michael Grubbs' case. So he is a 23-year-old man, lives in Ashland, Oregon, had started in high school working at a very popular grocery store there, the Shop and Cart. And he was walking home from work one evening, right after work, from walking home to his apartment on a bike path, walking path that's very well traveled and pretty popular, around 5 o'clock on November 19th, 2011. And a person on a bike saw someone lying off to the side of the path and thought they were drunk or stoned or passed out, maybe needed medical help. And they didn't have a cell phone, but someone else who was walking by did. So they were able to call you, I guess, or 911. And you were one of the first responders in David's case. Is that true? You were not the chief of police yet. You were a detective at that time?
I was a patrol sergeant, so I was in charge of the weekend day shift team, or Team 2, as we call it. I was due to go off duty at about 7 o'clock. Of course, that didn't happen. But
right.
So we got the call at about 5:35 that evening, and I responded along with one of the patrol officers, and the ambulance had already come and immediately recognized that they were dealing with a death scene, at that point unknown what sort of death scene, so they had backed away. And the officer and I, with our flashlights, were scanning around in the darkness because it's pitch black at this point.
Right.
And we both came across David's body at about the same time. And so I was one of the first two officers, both of us arriving at the same time to come across to be directed to the crime scene.
And this was it was a Saturday?
It was a Saturday,
Yeah.
and it was a very cold and rainy Saturday. And I immediately, anybody would have looked at it and known that it was a criminal death. There had been some thought at first that it was a gunshot, and I, having seen lots of gunshot victims when I worked as a police officer in Detroit before moving out here, I knew immediately that it wasn't a gunshot, that it was an edged weapon attack. And I remember conveying that to the guy that was then the deputy chief of police when he got on scene. So the call went out for the detectives, and neighboring agencies started flooding in, and we very quickly realized that it was going to be a pretty significant homicide investigation.
So your experience in Detroit is really helpful here in Ashland, Oregon, because, I haven't explained yet, but his injury appears to have been from a very large, rounded blade, potentially a sword or a machete, something of that nature. And that's probably pretty rare.
It is, and not to jump too far ahead, but one of the things that came out in this investigation, he was essentially decapitated, and one of the things that came out in the investigation is the detective in charge of it at the time and the deputy chief took the case to the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, which, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, is the unit that was kind of highlighted in the movie Silence of the Lambs. They're the people that get inside the offender's head, so to speak. And the FBI BAU, or Behavioral Analysis Unit, they just didn't have a whole lot to give us. Ideally, when they're presented with a case, they have some framework or some direction to point the police department in, and they simply didn't really have anything that they could give us on this, because it's not just an anomaly for Ashland or Jackson County or the state of Oregon. It's an anomaly for the United States. It's such a unique case that there's just no basis for comparing it to other stuff.
It is so unique, and that leads me to I'm sure there are a myriad of theories. So when the Ashland resident told me about this case, she did a great job of explaining it and waited until the end to say, he was walking home from work and, no known enemies, sweet kid. I've known him for years. He works at my grocery store, and he was almost decapitated, or essentially decapitated. And she said, with something like a machete. And I'm like, oh, okay. So the first thing you think, or not you, but the general you thinks is, okay, crazed homeless person. And then you think, would a crazed homeless person have the wherewithal to carry a larger weapon? How do they not, if you're homeless, you're walking, you're on a bike, it's not going to be convenient. It's not a pocket knife or a hunting knife. It's a larger implement. So that's probably not, a good theory. It sounds like it was absolutely not a robbery, because his wallet and things were still on his person. Nothing like that was stolen. It sounds like there was not a lot of defensive wounds, like he may not have even had much time to think or act.
Yeah, everything that you're saying is right on target. With one thing that I would differ on, in the days that followed David's murder, we got countless, just dozens and dozens, so many tips of, I saw so and so with a sword, or I saw so and so with a machete. And so machetes are actually, we found out very quickly, very common in the not just the transient community, but in the community in general. And I have never noticed so many people carrying swords, and you would that's an appropriate reaction, because before this, if somebody said, a lot of people carry swords around, I would have said, no, that's not something that people carry around. But
right.
man, a lot of people carry swords around. Yeah.
I mean, is that just true in
everywhere,
Ashland, or is that everywhere?
Well, I know it's true in Ashland because I saw swords everywhere after this happened. And we got a lot of complaints, and we looked or a lot of tips, and we looked into every tip that we got, and there's a lot of swords out there, and there's a lot of machetes out there.
Wow.
And so, could it have been a kind of a deranged, unhinged, homeless person, or just person in general that had a machete? Sure, it could have been. Could it have been somebody that was high on some hallucinogenic drug or otherwise intoxicated, and they had a fill in the blank on the weapon, a machete, a sword? We just know that it's large and heavy, and it's a bladed instrument. Beyond that, we really don't know a whole lot. So it could have been any of those things. And one thing that I've always recognized, or that I think we've recognized, is that of the hundreds of people that we've talked to on this, and the hundreds or thousands of tips, whatever it's been, we probably, there's a good chance that we've already talked to the person that did this.
Yeah.
And it's just that piece of the puzzle hasn't clicked into place. And
right.
when it does, we'll look back and say, yeah, that completely makes sense, and it's in keeping with everything. But until that piece of the puzzle is revealed, then we can't know which of the hundreds of people we're supposed to be really looking at.
Of course. It's shocking to hear the number of people that carry a weapon that isn't easy or transportable. It's very fascinating to me because it's typically not even a weapon that someone would use as a weapon of choice if you were just, a senseless monster. It's kind of a niche thing, except apparently not as niche as I think.
Well, one of the things about the Ashland community, and earlier we were talking about the I-5 corridor, and I suspect it's true all up and down the I-5 corridor. There's a massive homeless problem. You've got the people who are against their will, they are displaced from their homes. You've got the stereotypical kind of middle-aged hobo kind of person that is the typical middle-aged guy drinking a 40-ouncer out of a brown paper bag that's been around forever. And then we also have this increasing nomadic population that are kind of engaging in a counterculture movement. It's sort of the 2019, now 2019, then 2011 version of the hippie movement, where they're just kind of free-ranging up and down the West Coast. And a lot of them, we found, are carrying machetes because they need to cut their sleeping nook or their camping nook out of the blackberry bushes or out of the forest or something like that. So these guys aren't staying very often. They're not staying at the Campgrounds of America place with a nice
right.
manicured campsite. They're staying in the wilderness, in whatever piece of wilderness they can literally hack out with their machete and put down their bedroll. So, do people carry machetes? One would think no, but the answer is yes, they do.
It is very fascinating to me. This piece of information is even more fascinating. And to go back to something you said, I completely am on board with the fact that I know how important this case has been to Ashland, to you personally, to David's family and friends and coworkers. And I bet you have talked to more people than you ever thought you'd talk to in your life, especially on a case like this, and one with so little evidence. And it's a bit overwhelming. But I'm quite sure that you have probably spoken to whoever did this, because even as random as it seemed, I don't know that there's as much random to it as one would think at first glance. Even though his wallet wasn't stolen, you would think if someone is homeless or insane, they might even think to take something, or maybe they felt, if they have a mental health issue, they felt like someone was encroaching on their property or where they wanted to hack out their blackberry bush. So there was, in articles I've read, a report of maybe there were some cuts on trees close to where you found David. Were those, do you think, done previously, like someone trying out, like maybe they were attempting to see if they could do something really awful with their blade? Or do you think it just, was there and not really connected?
Well, in the end, I don't know. It's a lot of coincidence for them not to be connected.
Right.
And so it's easy to imagine that somebody was there and they're hacking away at the wood, and then somehow David gets introduced into the scenario and it goes very badly. Maybe they're not connected. I would guess that probably they are, but that's complete speculation on my part.
Understood. Yeah, no, I know we can't answer anything, and part of the reason that, I think that you are being so open about doing this podcast, and part of the reasons I do this podcast is because cases like this that have to be so frustrating and that are still unsolved, I would be, I'm happy to shine any kind of light on it that I can. And one thing we, for better or worse, one thing we have to admit is that the interwebs and the kids have become citizen sleuths and armchair detectives. And it doesn't mean that you want a bunch of people sending you tips from Crazyville, but what it does mean is that somehow, somewhere, at some time, someone may hear this podcast and think, oh, I might know something. It might have been very small. I might have seen something that at the time I didn't think was important. It's very interesting to me the way that, even things as simplistic at this point as Facebook, but how important those things are, because they can get out immediately and have a lot of eyes or ears on something where it used to take. I still believe probably all cases are solved with good old-fashioned shoe leather, with law enforcement beating the bushes, with a machete or without a machete, but beating the bushes. And that's when cases get solved. And these, podcasts, things like this, all of the true crime television, especially something focusing on an unsolved or a case that could use a little push. I'm really grateful for things like this. More grateful for people like you, obviously, who do the really hard work.
Well, in that light, I have a question, because I think even if you just throw a small stone into a pond, the ripples can come out. What can you tell us about what if anything, about David's friends and family, and how they reacted, and what his, or even just what we know about what his life was like?
Well, like Melissa said, he worked at Shopping Cart. He was very popular there. He had some roommates, and I think his life looked like any 23-year-old, or like many 23-year-old life looks. He would hang out with his friends and play video games and such, and it was fairly it didn't seem to be remarkable. And of course, we've looked very diligently at everybody in his circle, his friends and his family. Of course, they are beyond reproach in this, but we've looked under every other stone we could find, and everybody at Shopping Cart got interviewed. We canvassed every neighborhood we could think of, and his life, he seemed to be a popular, mild-mannered, kind of unassuming young man. That there was, he didn't stand out, and I don't say that in a way to be dismissive of him, but there just wasn't anything really pronounced about him. He did not seem to be a very big person, like big personality. He seemed to be a very nice, kind, loving, gentle guy with a very good reputation, and a lot of people that thought and think very highly of him.
Yeah, so, the manager of the Shopping Cart said he was literally the nicest kid I've ever spoken to. I mean, you don't say that about an employee unless you mean it.
Right, and so many murders that you're familiar with and I'm familiar with, and that we know are out there. Somebody gets attacked, and you're like, oh, yeah, that guy was involved in drugs, or he was a bad guy, or his neighbor did it, or a spouse did it, or whatever. And there's an easy path to go down, and there's kind of an immediate motive that you can attribute it to it. That guy got attacked because of this thing. He's in the gang life. He's in drugs. He's
a compromised life.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. There's nothing there with David. He's just a nice, unassuming, kind of normal guy that didn't piss anybody off. He was a nice guy.
You could see, I'm a big believer, I'm sure you could hold a picture up of someone who looks, who is a terrible monster, and I'd be like, well, he's cute. But you can look at a picture of David, and he just looks, and when you say like kind of a normal average kid, that's a really great description. He doesn't look too much of anything. He's a handsome kid, but he just looks like he's 23, his life is still kind of unfolding, and he looks like a handsome 23-year-old kid.
Yeah, but I want to get back to something that both of you touched on, that one piece or the pebble into the pond causes the ripple. Like I said, probably I've talked to, or another police officer has talked to somebody that has done this, and probably we've also talked to the person that didn't do it but knows more than he or she is saying.
Right.
And so I'm appreciative for this podcast. I'm appreciative for anything that keeps this, because it is almost 8 years old.
Yeah, November.
And so anything that keeps us hitting the refresh button on this, and maybe next week, next month, next year, whatever it takes. I'd rather it be sooner than later, but hopefully somebody will hear something, and they'll say, I remember one thing, and let's pull on that thread, or I've been carrying this weight around too long, and I need to get rid of it, and let me call the Ashland police or my local police and just unload myself of this weight because it's stressing me out too much. Or I did it, and I want the family to get closure, and I don't think it's going to be that easy, but there is one thing that we just need, that one bit of community engagement to click into place, and then hopefully everything else will fall into place, and we'll be able to give the family the closure and the town some closure.
I think that's absolutely the reason why, a lot of us do what we do, and I know it's one of the many terrific reasons you do what you do. So let's talk a little bit. It was a great point that producer Mark made. Let's talk a little bit about odd theories besides homeless people. So David, being a 23-year-old young man with a normal life, played, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm old and I don't give a shit about, games, but played, was it Mortal Kombat maybe? He was very fond of, and that has a lot of a violent potential swordplay. I don't really know, maybe just guns, but is there any chance that anyone that he was, a gamer with had some sort of a beef?
Well, anything's possible. I remember that we seized his, I want to say, PlayStation 4. I think it was a 4 at the time and not a 3, but I might be wrong about that. And that we had it forensically analyzed. I don't remember exactly what the results of that analysis are, but I remember that nothing really remarkable came out of it. So we looked at everything we could think of, and part of that was looking at, all right, he's an online gamer, let's see who he's chatting with, and whatever the situation was, I know it didn't lead anywhere.
Right.
So we did ponder on that as a possibility, but we pondered on everything else as a possibility also, and nothing really led anywhere.
So there's also, a lot of online chatter about odd things. I mean, Ashland, Oregon is the home of the Shakespeare Festival.
Yep.
There's a lot of, cosplay and
LARPers.
Yeah, live action role playing. I had never heard of LARPing.
Neither had I until this happened.
I was like, is that movie with Robin Williams? And I'm like, no, that's The World According to Garp. I have never heard of LARPing. I've heard of cosplay, but for other bizarre reasons. But I understand that the main place that live action role playing happens there is not even that close to the bike path, walking path where David was found. But
No.
but kind of, sort of, maybe a little bit in the same city. Is there any chance that, there's someone who's confused and, about what's reality and what's live action role playing?
Again, anything's possible. The place that we caught up with the LARPers at was Lithia Park, which is
right.
pretty significantly displaced from where David's body was found, and it's not even close to the bike path, but that's one of the big wide open spaces, and that's where all of the LARPing took place, according to what we could find out. There's no indication that any of it took place in Hunter Park, which is the park adjacent to where the bike path is and David's body was found. So a few 2-3 miles away from each other in a relatively small city. So anything's possible. And you mentioned somebody who's failing to distinguish between fantasy and reality. That, again, very possible. I wouldn't want to speculate on that. It's a little bit easier for me as a person to imagine, instead of somebody making the cold, calculated, deliberate, but conscientious decision, I'm going to, attack this person and kill him. It's a little bit easier to stretch that somebody's a little bit deranged or not in their right head.
Right.
So that's not as a professional comment, but as a personal comment, that seems more likely. But any of these things is possible.
Right. And I'm sure you spoke to, when you mentioned, and you've mentioned it a couple times, which is very fascinating to me, there's about 100 employees of the shopping cart. And he had a roommate, and I know one of the roommates, I think brother, was going to move out, and they were looking for a new roommate, but I even read the ad, and the ad was so, non-offensive and almost non-committal. Like, here's this room we're going to have available soon. We hang out, but you are free to do your own stuff. I mean, it sounded like kind of the perfect ad for someone in their early 20s who's looking for someone to split the rent. I mean, there was just nothing about that would have, I don't know if people had come to check out the room, if there was any, strangers who would have been around.
Yeah, it could be. And I don't have any immediate recollection of that. Again, though, David was living on California Street, which is about a block and a half away from the police station.
Wow.
And not too far. It's a relatively small town. David's house, I think it's 77 California, to where he was murdered. They're not immediately adjacent to each other. There's several blocks in between them, and so maybe somebody came over to the house. Maybe they became familiar with David, and maybe they, knew that he was coming home on the bike path. But there wouldn't have been somebody at the house that, unless they had been deliberately looking for David, they would not have stumbled across him so far away from the house.
That makes sense too. And something you're pointing out is that this bike path, I mean, it sounds like it's all, very verdant and in nature, but Ashland is a very, depending on the weather, I guess, an outdoor place where people are encouraged to walk and to bike, and it's a very hospitable place for people who like the outdoors. So this bike path, walking path, was not far from the back of an elementary school and also a tennis court.
So Hunter Park is adjacent to Ashland Elementary School, or maybe it's called Walker Elementary School, I can't remember. But there is an elementary school right there. And so essentially David was murdered right behind an elementary school.
Right.
And there are tennis courts right. The thing immediately adjacent to the crime scene is a parking lot, but then tennis courts, then a swimming pool, and then a senior center, and all of that is next to just a kind of run-of-the-mill city park. A very, I don't know how to say it, a place where you wouldn't think bad stuff would happen with the elementary school and the senior center and the tennis courts, but yet there it is.
Pretty populated.
Yeah.
And I understand that the time of year, and you said it was kind of a cold and rainy day. It was a Saturday, though, so it wasn't even a weeknight. At the time, I know it was early in the day, but in November in Ashland, the same way it is here in Southern California, it's already dark. So the immediacy with which he was found, because people who, end up murdered and left outside aren't always found within a half an hour.
Right.
I mean, I think that's kind of amazing that he was seen, identified, and you and others were brought onto the scene right away. And yet there's so little evidentiary value to anything around him. It was like someone dropped from the sky, did this, and then was taken back up and teleported away.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to go on, and the canvas didn't turn up very much. There's only one person of interest that has popped up, and the only reason I mention that is because I've mentioned it on media before, and other than that, we're just kind of stuck waiting for more information to come in.
And you don't have to answer this if you can't, but is this person of interest someone who was known to David or is a complete stranger?
Well, I'll actually talk about the person of interest because I like I said, I've identified him.
Oh, yay.
And I'll talk as openly about it as I can. I don't have any reason to believe that they knew each other. The person of interest, the one person that we have pointed to and said we really would like to figure out this guy's deal, is a man named Christian Olivier De Laurentiis. And the reason he is a person of interest is because
he was kind of a vagrant, right? Kind of a traveler.
Well, I wouldn't say he was a traveler. He was and presumably is not anymore, a extreme heroin addict.
Okay.
But he was variously homed around Ashland, and his parents live in Grants Pass, which is about 30 miles north of here. But I know that he had at least one home in Ashland around this time, because there was another complaint involving him where he was living in this house this apartment on Siskiyou Boulevard. But Christian was in Ashland at the time, and Christian was a heroin addict. And at some point after David's murder, Christian left and went to the Portland area, and Christian was doing bank robberies with a man whose name escapes me because it's not super relevant to our case. But at some point, and this is all public information, and I've talked about it publicly before, so I don't mind talking about it again. At some point, Christian thought that his bank robbery partner, and they were both robbing banks to fuel their narcotics habits, was going to turn on him, so Christian murdered his bank robbery partner.
And dismembered him or something.
Dismembered him
yeah.
and put him in a freezer.
Right.
And so here we have somebody that we know is capable of murder. He was using edged weapons in the past and was in Ashland at the time and was an extreme user of, substances that put you into a very much altered state of mind. And so we cannot help but look at him. The reason that we can't really move on it is because he is serving life in prison for the murder of the guy up in the Portland area, but there's a couple of unresolved cases that he has that he's represented by counsel on. And of course, if he's represented by counsel, we can't go talk to him. And of course, counsel is going to say, no, you can't talk to my client. So, if Christian has a change of heart and wants to, reach out and say, hey, I want to talk to you, then, we'd love to talk to him. And, again, the community is looking for healing, and most importantly, the family is looking for closure and healing. And if he or anybody else can, give everybody that healing, then that would be a really good thing.
Absolutely. And Christians or the other things that may or may not be connected to him, are they violent attacks with a similar...
No.
Okay.
There was a robbery, not a robbery, a burglary of a business downtown, another burglary of a business downtown, and I think a theft of a firearm or something. But I'm not aware of anything that he did that came onto our radar that involved edged weapons.
But there's a feeling you have just that you want to talk to him and see what you feel in your gut as, as someone in law enforcement?
Well, I think that we would be negligent if we did not try to talk to him. You got somebody who's here who
Right.
we know is capable of homicide. He's capable of dismemberment. We have to talk to that person, and we would be remiss if we did not. So I don't. One thing I'll say is that I don't know that I have any particularly good interviewing skills, but there are detectives that do have really good interviewing skills, and it would be great if Christian would make himself available so that some of our detectives can talk to him and they can get a feel for it one way or the other and try to, cross him off the list. That's
right.
fine. Let's just have some progress one way or the other. But we would be negligent if we didn't consider him as a person of interest.
Of course, that makes sense. So here's just hoping that even if he is represented by counsel, that, you saying his name and a desire to hear from him might lead him to say, I'll talk to you because I have nothing to do with this.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Let's just, close that chapter and let
Right.
APD move on to thinking about something else.
Something else. Yeah. That's a shame that, he hasn't been able to come forward. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But so in a similar vein, did David have, other than his roommate and obviously the people who adored him, I know he was very into music in high school, and there's even a scholarship named after him, a music scholarship. Did he have any in his circle of friends? Did he, I'm just going to ask this and you can tell me absolutely no. Would there have been a chance that disgruntled lover, partner, male, female, someone jealous?
That just never came up. I mean, we looked at that as an option, and we just didn't see anything there to look at. And we don't know what David's sexuality was. But even if somebody is presenting as one sexuality, maybe there is something going on that people are unaware of. And so I remember thinking about that.
Right.
We talked about this girl at work liked him, or he liked this girl at work. Well, okay, maybe some guy liked him at work, and you have to look at everything, even if there's no reason to believe that there's anything other than heterosexual angle to it. You have to consider that maybe there is something going on because maybe somebody's got a hidden life, and simply none of that got any legs with
Right.
David, and
Right.
we looked at it and came up with nothing.
Right. That makes sense too. But I just had to ask because I was like, this guy, is just not. It's tough to imagine it would just be a random attack, but it's almost difficult to imagine another scenario because of. I'm not saying he's like squeaky clean, but I'm saying he didn't have a chance to live in a way where he wouldn't have been squeaky clean. He was a young man living his life,
right.
And there's not a lot. Anywhere, anything about him that is anything other than glowing, not really anything at all negative. So when you have a case like this that couldn't be more frustrating, couldn't be more, aggravating every night when you're trying to go to sleep, is this when you decide to bring in retired Sheriff's Detective Retzer?
Well, I'm not going to say what I was watching, but I was watching a program, and there just seemed to be some questions about how some of the police work was going on. And because this case means so much to the entire Ashland Police Department and the community and the family, and there's nothing really looming, hanging over APD like this is. And so I have always said with great confidence, because I believe it and I know it in my core, I'll look Michael Grubbs and Sherry Grubbs, that's mom and dad, in the eye. I'll look at the sisters in the eye, and I'll say, hey, we don't have anything, but I really believe we're not missing anything here. And I need to be able to maintain that confidence to look them in the eye. And so when I kind of got triggered by this thing that I was watching on a national level, and it looked to me like there probably was some kind of shoddy police work going on, I said, I want to have a complete review done, because I want to be able to continue to look all the family members and all the community members in the eye and say, no, we haven't cracked this yet, we haven't closed this case, but I'm confident we're doing everything we can. So my initial thought was to have like a 2-week block of time where me, because I worked the case, I transitioned from patrol to detectives about 6 weeks after this happened, and I took over detectives, and so 2012 I did pretty much nothing but work on this case, and for a good part of 2013. So I already had a lot of hands-on with the case, and I said, I want to sit down with some key detectives and people that were involved in this, and I want to go over the entire case start to finish, review every report, review every piece of evidence, and if this takes 2 weeks doing it, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, that's fine, but we're going to go over the entire case. And one of the detectives happened to know that Charlie Retzer, who's a very well-respected and experienced homicide detective from the Sheriff's Department, that he was about to retire, and said, hey, Charlie's about to retire, why don't we bring him on? And he had some involvement, but not overwhelming involvement in the case, so he is effectively a fresh set of eyes.
Right.
Let's bring him on, and he can go over the case start to finish. So cool. So Charlie comes in, he starts with the case from the beginning, he walks through the entire thing, he kind of ties up some loose ends that are inconsequential. As the tips continue to just barely trickle in at this point, Charlie's the one that follows up on him. And then at some point last year, he came to me, or the detective sergeant, whoever came to me and said, all right, this task is completed. I've gone over the entire case, and there's just nothing else to be done here. And so I can still, because me and my team took that step and brought Charlie in, I will continue to look anybody in the eye and say, nope, it's not done yet, but I'm confident that we're not missing anything.
Right.
And I'm kind of getting a little bit amped up here, because people do challenge me on this sometimes, and I do get kind of pissed off about it. We're a relatively small town police department. The town's about 21,000. We got about 30 cops that work here, and murders only happen in Ashland about once every 7 years. Although unfortunately they've been more frequent than that recently. And so people say that the Ashland cops can't solve this. They can't solve the David Grubb murders or murder. And I say, okay, well, no, we haven't solved it, and the Medford police haven't solved it because they've been involved in it, and the Sheriff's Department hasn't solved it, and the troopers haven't solved it, and the FBI. Sorry.
Yeah, no, say it.
The FBI hasn't solved it because they were involved in it from the get-go also.
Right.
And I do get pissed off, and I do get defensive when, and I actually, a friend of mine actually made the mistake of telling me that somebody needed to come in and clean up my town because of the Grubbs murder, and I absolutely went off on him. And don't ever challenge me on this, because I take it deadly serious, and I will fight tooth and nail to defend what the Ashland Police Department has done, because I know that we haven't stood alone in this. We've stood with all of our partners, up to and including the FBI. And I will continue, because I've taken the steps like bringing Charlie Retzer in, I will continue to stand up and look anybody in the eye and say, no, we're not there yet, but I know that we're doing everything we can.
Well, I don't know who that person was, but I've just unfriended them on Facebook. So I don't know if he's still your friend, but we're still friends. He's just he just runs his mouth in inappropriate ways sometimes, and he doesn't realize that what he's saying, has weight, that words have power to them, and you can't throw them around willy-nilly. Well, he doesn't deserve you as a friend, number one. And number two, does he have a machete?
He does not.
Okay. I was just checking. It can be rhetorical. You don't have to answer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I got to be honest, when you said at the very beginning, when we started talking, that you gave everything to the FBI, to the BAU, it's the storied behavioral analysis unit, that, Mindhunter is an amazing documentary about the origins of the BAU. And they didn't have a lot for you. My stomach dropped.
Yeah.
My stomach dropped. I was like, oh, because if you I didn't even realize that the FBI had looked over David's case. If they can look over something this unique, I'm going to say is the best word I can think right now, and they don't have something for you, this is really odd. I mean, this is really odd. And you are exactly right. You have turned over every stone, every leaf, and I have to tell you, and I'm not trying to butter you up because I don't need a chief of police right now in my life, but but you are the most transparent chief of police we've ever spoken to, and your transparency is something I'm in awe of because and just a little side note, when you host a podcast, some law enforcement are open to talking to you, but not all of them, and a lot of them won't even return your call or acknowledge that you exist. And I filled out a request form for records, and within a day I got back an email saying David Michael Grubbs has no arrest record, and I was like, oh, that's nice. That wasn't what I wanted. Yeah. I did not expect him to have an arrest record, but and speaking to before I spoke to Detective Spence, and he was spectacular. So I understand, without having been there in person and meeting you in person, that your group of law enforcement are stellar human beings. So I can vouch for that without having to have a reason to have interacted with you other than this.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that we got a good thing going here, and I hope that we get the community engagement we need to solve this. So I'm getting tingles when I even say this. I fantasize about calling the Grubbs family and telling them that we've got news.
We got them. Yeah, I bet you do. I mean, this above a lot of cases, and not that every case isn't important, but especially an unsolved case this long. This is way more than a puzzler. This is a vendetta. In my mind already, it's a vendetta. I can't imagine how you feel. So
that day will come, Chief. I mean, yeah. Hearing you say that, Ashland is very lucky to have you.
They sure are.
You're the kind of police officer that we all hope all police officers are.
Yeah, we all wish we had in our town. That's for sure.
I appreciate that. We got a good thing here, and I'm very happy to be a part of it. Both the town in general, as goofy as Ashland can be sometimes, it's a really cool place.
Keep Ashland weird.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got a good PD.
And the tipster who told me about the story is very enamored with the town, all of it, and with your department, absolutely. So before we let you go, I'm just going to ask you this kind of open-ended blanket question, because I have a lot of theories and questions in my head that I'm sure you've beaten to death. But what do you think happened?
I have it in my head what I think happened. And I'm not going to say it because I don't think that it's appropriate for me to say it. I'm so heavily involved in the case, have been since it happened. And my answer is I'm not going to answer you other than I do think if I had to place a bet, I know what that bet would be and what the prediction would look like about what happened. But I'm not going to say what's in my head.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you would consider doing this, but I used to play a game with producer Mark, especially when we went to see movies like, was it The Sixth Sense? The I Talk to Dead People movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote down, because I figured it out from the trailer.
Okay.
I'm like, Bruce Willis is dead. So I wrote that on a piece of paper because I didn't want to ruin the movie for producer Mark. I wrote it on a piece of paper and put in an envelope, like you might be too young to remember, but like Karnak, that Johnny Carson did Karnak. Yeah. So I put it in an envelope and I put it in his pocket. And we watched the movie and I go, open up the envelope. And he opens it up and he's like, God damn it. So I hope you will write it down in your journal or a notebook, what you think happened, and if it comes to pass, I hope you will know that holding on to that is probably one of the reasons that it gets solved, along with all the other hard work you do. So
well, I appreciate that, and I have shared my theory with people that are already in the know about the case.
Good.
And so we've already got it documented.
Good.
If I turn out to be right, then I've got witnesses.
That's awesome. That makes me happy that you have not just kept it to yourself. I'm glad that someone is the gatekeeper or the caretaker of this information, and it would be, phenomenal if it's your theory or a different theory, but we're all waiting for the day that you can tell the Grubbs family we got him.
So very much yes, and I don't even have to be the one that's right. I just need this. We all need it. The family needs it. It just needs to be closed. So make it my theory, make it somebody else's, make it something nobody ever thought of. Just somebody make it happen is all that I need and care about.
And that's the perfect statement to wrap this up, because you're pretty special, dude. We're really grateful that you took the time to talk to us. And
well, thanks for highlighting the case. I appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. If you happen to know anything about the case involving David Michael Grubbs, if you have any information at all, please call the Ashland, Oregon Police Department. Chief O'Mara and all of the Ashland PD await your call or your email. We will have that information in the show notes. You can email us at jttipsters@gmail.com. You can even call us here at 832-TIPSTER, 832-847-7837, and more cowbell.
And remember, if you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, just go to patreon.com/justthetipsters. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.